This is North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for tuning in. We're getting down to the last few weeks of the session. There's a lot of action on appropriations, and here to talk about what's happening is a member of House Appropriations, State Representative Kathy Hawken of Fargo, a Republican. Representative Hawken, thanks for taking some time.
I always love coming to visit with you. It's always enjoyable, and I learn things.
Well, we hope to learn a lot because, you know, this is the time where the session is very fluid. A lot of decisions are being made in conference committees, and sometimes it's just kind of hard to keep track of where everything's going.
It truly is. I had some emails from people who want to know what's happening in the Senate, and it's happening at the same time that we are dealing with issues in the House. And so I don't know what has happened in the Senate until we both get out of session, and then I can go find out. But it is a very fast-paced, fast-moving time. On some issues, that's, this is part of the process. This is the end game where we settle up the differences between the House and the Senate. This session, there are so many major bills with huge differences that having three people decide what we've worked on all session becomes somewhat concerning. Well, I guess it's six, three from the Senate and three from the House. We need to be on top of that. We need to know when they're meeting. We need to be there so we can pay attention to what is happening and make sure that that product, when it's done, is at least partially what we hoped it would be.
Now, not all the conference committees are set yet, too.
No,
You've got a lot of things that are coming up. What are your conference committees right now? What are your big issues?
My conference committees right now are not such big issues. I have financial institutions, and the only issue there is a pay package. And I don't know whether your viewers are aware or not, but the governor had a set pay package which went along with a study that was done over the last couple of years to bring our state employees to market level. The House decided that that was a little too much of a jump at one time and cut that back. So basically it went from 4 and 4 plus a little if you'd been there a long time or were especially good at your job, to 3 and 3, which makes a huge difference. We also took all the vacant positions and rolled up that money that the different agencies can come and ask for it, but it isn't automatically in their budget like it has been before.
Now, that roll-up idea has been tried a long time. It's been tried for a number of sessions that I've heard.
It has been tried for a number of sessions, and we'll see whether this is the time it goes through. I don't know. That certainly is one of the issues that's up for debate. Once the powers that be make the decision on what we're exactly going to do on the funding formula for our employees, then some of the dominoes will start to fall rather quickly, because that's the only issue in 2008, which is financial institutions. There aren't any other differences between the Senate and the House. So that one will decide that conference committee. Now, I believe I'm going to be on the Industrial Commission. I carried that bill, and there are several issues in there, aside from the salaries. So there we would have some issues to talk about. We took out a couple sections which deleted 2 funds, which we've since found we need to have those funds, even though we aren't going to do the bills that this year went with them. So there are things of that nature that happen that we have to correct. And the higher ed bills, the K-12 funding bill, the Commerce bill, DOT, Department of Transportation, there are a number of major funding issues out there that have some work to do and some major differences between the Senate and the House. So there are going to be a lot of meetings in the next few days. We have 105 conference committees.
Now, that seems high to me.
That's very high. It's very
105 conference committees, and a lot of them, as you said, maybe just over pay plans and things like
well,
that.
Well, the budgets would be pay plans, but there are also a very large number of conference committee on policy issues.
Surprising.
So it's the most ever.
Surprising, isn't it, when the session was billed as we've got money to spend, we need to save some of it, send some of it back, and spend it wisely.
Right.
And then policy issues are really taking a lot of center stage in this session. It's been kind of amazing to a lot of people who are watching this.
There certainly are a lot of issues that are out there. If I'd been in charge, I think the first thing I would have done is had everybody write down 5 things they wanted to see us do that were visionary, that would make North Dakota grow and continue the prosperity when the oil isn't there anymore. Because we all know it's not going to last forever. But we have a really good agricultural communities that are doing quite well right now, and we've diversified over the years. We need to do a little more of that. But what things are visionary? When we have this extra blessing, how do we best utilize it? And I'm a little disappointed we haven't done that.
Yeah, you are involved with the 2020 initiative, what North Dakota is going to look like down
Yes.
the road and possibly into the time when the oil dries up. What out of this session is coming to take a look at the 2020 report and is going to meet that?
At this point, we're still sort of, the number one thing, which is, of course, one of my favorites, is childcare. And certainly in the western part of the state, this has become a huge issue if we want to draw the families here, which I think is a goal, is to have the whole group here and not just a bunch of gentlemen, although they're fine, but to have families and to grow the western part of our state. One of the things we desperately need is to have good quality childcare. Right now, that bill is in limbo. It has gone back and forth. The only thing that is available right now is in the Commerce budget, and it is for facility grants. And I can very honestly say that's nice, but it's not going to do anything, because you can build the facility, but if you don't have a trained caregiver to be inside it, it isn't going to go anywhere. So we'll have to see that it's been amended. It's sitting in the Senate, and once they get done with water, they'll maybe look at childcare. The second thing was housing. And there are a number of balls in the air still on housing. There is a slight disagreement on whether the money should be in commerce or in housing, and exactly how it should go out, and what should be grants and what should be loans. And so those are also differences that will have to be decided. There seems to be a little bit of thought that we could be getting close to overbuilding. And yet the other side says there's still no place for people to live.
And is that vestiges of what happened in the 1970s and 80s when everybody looking at the oil industry then, everything was go, 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 and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out of price?
And I think certainly for the people who've been around, there's a little more sense of caution than for people who are newer to the industry and are excited and think that it does have some longevity. So yes, I think, and I think they're very, very honest and real concerns. So, we'll see, but there will be somewhere between $15 and $30 million for housing in some form, and that was the number two thing in the 2020 report from the different meetings around the state.
So there is some progress.
There's a little bit of progress there.
All right. In terms of one of the main things that people talked about was returning people more money for property tax relief and income tax relief. That seems to be kind of a moving target too. The two sides seem to have some major disagreements on that area. And when I say the two sides, I'm thinking about the Senate and the House. Not
Exactly. Yeah,
it's not
an RNAD. It is definitely a Senate and a House. One of the things that we don't do a very good job of all the time is telling what is going on and what positive things are happening. And right out of the chute this year, we put $600 and some million out there for infrastructure, road construction types of projects that were long overdue, but we got the money out there so they could be bid and they could be started and we can get them completed. In that money, there was also, as part of the governor's plan, places where counties and townships would have normally done a match and didn't have to do that right now because of this extra benefit that we're gaining from the oil. So that's property tax relief. But we didn't ever say that. Now, I would like a United Way chart to say, okay, this bill gave you this much property tax relief. Because I think you have to let people know that when we do some of these things, then the local community doesn't have to do them. And that is an opportunity for that local community not to raise taxes, but to make sure that they're lowered to that extent. And so hopefully with education funding, that will be the main vehicle, I believe, that will send back money to the locals. Where some of the controversy comes in is, then do we cap the local political subdivisions? And I'm not sure how that's going to come out.
That's interesting. Of course, there's the difference between how many mills it should be capped at, for
Exactly.
education funding. It's 50 mils for the Senate version, which is the governor's level. The House did 70 mils,
Right.
somewhere that's going to meet, and that's going to work itself out.
It is.
And there will be some major property tax relief in that bill.
A tremendous amount. The amount of money that will go back to local school districts for education would be historic. And if it is used correctly, if the local people do what they should do and stay within the boundaries of, and I think the education people will, because that's pretty well set up. Where the concern comes in is, will the counties and the cities and the townships simply raise their levies and add more mills? And then there isn't any relief. So that's where how much do you micromanage and how much do you go on trust that because we're sending this money, they're not going to raise the taxes?
And that's been a difficult question
It
about
is.
micromanagement too, because that's the first accusation, is that the legislature is micromanaging in some respects.
We do like to do that a little bit, but I think when you put the dollars in, you sort of feel like, okay, we can say a little. I want to make sure we don't say too much.
Okay. In the income tax area, there seems to be a kind of a gulf between the House and the Senate, and the idea of corporate tax relief. There's a gulf.
There is a gulf, and I'm not sure, Dave, what the right answer is. Very honestly, I've not ever had a constituent call and bang on my door and say, I want property tax relief. There are 9 states that don't have property tax. North Dakota is number 10. Our property tax is not, not property tax, income tax. Our income tax is not huge at this point. And we're going to lower it some more. There isn't any doubt about that. It's how much. And in looking to the future, where's the cutoff line? When you don't have the oil, how do you then go back? So I mean, you want, there's a place where, okay, this is the right amount, and that's what I think we're trying to decide. What is the right amount? Corporate taxes, you certainly want businesses and people to come into the state and develop, so you don't want those to be too high, but you also want to be competitive, and so again, what's the right number? And it's there are 141 of us, and there probably are 141 figures as to what it should be.
Yeah, that probably won't work itself out till probably the last couple of days of session.
That usually is one of the last things.
Now, one of the things that's is a spending bill that's really gotten into a lot of controversy this time is higher education, because the governor did propose significant spending increases for our campuses. There was a new higher education formula, and House Appropriations made some changes to the formula and made some changes concerning, some of the things that were spending priorities. And this seems to be an interesting debate to watch, because I think we're just seeing it emerge now.
That is accurate. The bills came out on the floor today of the House. They have all gone through with lots of conversation and actually some very good debate on the medical school, on the funding formula. It's a different way of funding our colleges, and I personally think it's a wonderful idea to try. The governor had some really smart intellectual people from our state working on this, and it is a performance-based funding formula, which would be easy to track with each school. How are you doing? That's how you're going to get paid, and it can be tweaked as we move along. I think it's definitely worth trying, and I'm excited that the subcommittee and appropriations in the House decided to go back and put it back in. They put it in with less money than what the governor had, but that's something that can be worked out. At least the formula is still there, and that was a major concern to those of us who really are advocates for higher education.
So it really is based on student outcomes versus just the people in the seats.
Exactly. What, how many credit hours are being handled, in what manner, and how are they going to a graduation? There's completion. There are all different kinds of pieces in there that will be good for the schools, and I think good for the students as well, and I think eventually for the bottom line of North Dakota. One thing that we sometimes forget is the state of North Dakota actually, we have 11 colleges and universities, which are something we vote on about every 7 to 10 years, and everybody says, yes, we want to keep them all, so we do. But the percentage that the state of North Dakota gives to them is not nearly as high as one would think. For example, I did, and I can't tell you for sure what they are this session because I'm not on that subsection, but last year I did a chart, and University of North Dakota got 23.5%, NDSU got 22.5% of their budget from the state of North Dakota. So it's not a major piece, but from the way we talk, you would think it was. The other side that we don't ever put in is there's some money that comes back from what happens in those schools.
Absolutely. So you've got research dollars, especially at UND and NDSU. You've got tuition dollars. You've got other foundations that are supporting the whole thing, and that it's more of a mix than maybe people realize.
I think that's really the case, and so I think it's good for people to hear that they're not they're not driving us to bankruptcy. We don't spend that much of our money. Now the building piece, again, different ways of funding them. For years, any building we did was bonded. We pay now. It's cash up front. And that's a good way when you can do that.
Because there are no interest costs.
No interest costs.
Basically, we pay it cash in the barrel.
We're paying, yeah, it's pay as you go. And that is a marvelous thing when you can do it.
But there was the change that Representative Scarpole has pushed through to kind of pool the money.
Yes.
And then to kind of dole it out from the system office and the board.
And actually, that's a little confusing to me because the rankings that the governor received were from the Board of Higher Ed. They ranked, the colleges send in what they would like to see, the board ranks them, the governor decides what should be funded and at what level. So now the money has been pooled, not as much money as we would need to cover the budget, the buildings that were put in, and it goes through one person, which would be the chancellor. And I find that very troubling.
So again, it's in the central office.
It's a major change, yeah. Central office.
And there seems to be some concern about centralization of, if you want to call it power or authority, that may go into the chancellor's office. I know that there have been a number of legislators who have been nervous about that.
And I'm one of them. I'm terribly concerned the direction that we are going, and I'm hopeful that with time and discussion, we can make changes that are necessary, whatever those happen to be. We have some very good people on our Board of Higher Education. I would hate to see us throw that out, although that certainly is out there as well. There is a bill moving its way through, which people would have a chance to vote on, which would take the Board of Higher Ed out of our Constitution. I think maybe we need some different people than are there right now, but I think the system itself has lots of merit. I'm not sure that the legislature micromanaging each of those colleges would be better.
Considering what sparked the Board of Higher Education in the first place,
Yes.
back in Governor Langer's days, and a controversy at NDSU, it's just
Exactly.
history's kind of repeating itself in a way.
In a way it is. And do we need to all sit down and share the toys in the sandbox? Yes, we do. But I think we are most fortunate to have a group of leaders at our colleges and universities that are fabulous. They are doing absolutely amazing things in their own way on each of the campuses, and they're all different. But they're doing a fabulous job. I don't think we will be better served by them being micromanaged by one person who's sitting in Bismarck. That's not the right way to go either. So we need to figure out exactly what the right thing is. I think collaboration is much better than top-down decision-making. And so hopefully we'll get there.
So that's going to be another one of the conference committees right at the end to kind of watch.
Yes.
Because I think higher education...
Most definitely. I think that'll come right down to the end, and there will be a lot of discussions. The University Medical School.
Yes.
Is this something we want to do to provide? And there were some great speeches on the floor today of why that's a good investment. And so we'll see whether the ears were opened and how we go on that. Because when you put some of these points down on paper, building a new school, even though it's a lot of money, makes a ton of sense. So do we want to be visionary? Do we want to look past the end of our nose or not? And that's the decision.
So, just to recap for a second about the university had three options, University Medical School.
Correct.
One was to renovate the existing building, which nobody seemed to like.
No, that would not make any sense.
The number two that was in the governor's budget was to add to the existing building, add some bricks and mortar. But the third one, which came along, is to build a brand new school.
Yes.
And then that seems to be catching some momentum, but
Well,
there seems to be some concerns.
There was an interim committee that looked at health services across North Dakota. And after they had done their research to that group, it became extremely evident that number three was the only intelligent thing to do. And again, there are another number of reasons why. There would be some federal money that comes back when you're a facility administrated building that is built with state money as opposed to federal money. So we would get a buy down of about $36 million a biennium, which is, that's pretty
That's
nice
money.
payback.
Yeah.
But the best piece, I think, is it brings all of the different medical professions and all the different wheels all together, where they would actually be learning and working together like they would in the real world. We could have our occupational therapy, the nursing, the speech therapy, all in the same location, working together as a team as they would be going forward. There are also some stipulations that 80% would be students from North Dakota. And I think perhaps somewhere along the line there would be at least a gentleman's agreement that they were going to stay here. And that's important. We really need doctors and nurses and therapists.
And that was brought on the floor today.
And that was brought out. It was, like I said, it was a very, very positive debate, where it should be, what bill it should be in. That piece, who knows? But hopefully moving ahead, the people who are going to work on that heard what was being said.
In the few minutes we have left, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the diversion and how this thing is well, it's nowhere near settled at this point.
Not.
But
It's better today than it was yesterday.
I was going to say, but did it surprise you that it became such a hot issue, or were you kind of expecting that?
I guess I was hopeful that it would not be a hot issue. I think we all knew that the focus this session needed to be on the West, and that certainly is another hot issue, and everything's torn to bits and pieces and needs to be put back together in a rather quick fashion so that we can deal with all of the major needs the western part of the state has right now. Nobody is questioning that. It's how, and we've got the money and we need to do that. I really did not think that we would get into quite the situation we did, where there were roadblocks put up to help to keep from protecting the Fargo area. And there are always different sides to stories, but Fargo still is the biggest generator for the most part of sales tax. If you look at a 10-year map, you see that that's a very good source of income for the state of North Dakota and has been for many, many years. If it were to go away, it's a huge hit. So protecting it does make sense. And I think finally today, people came to agreement on some amendments that everyone can live with. And hopefully we can go forward from here and have the House and the Senate agree. But the Senate did, yesterday they lost by one vote, and today they won by a few.
By a few.
And they do have more oversight now, which I think was a concern. The Water Commission would definitely be paying attention to what's going on. There would be the money would not go until their plans and it's in the right shape.
But of course, there will be a conference committee too, as they'll hammer out some of the details.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's some concern if we could wait on doing anything going south for a couple of years. Well, that might be extremely possible. So, sometimes the discussion brings out good things.
What do you think are going to be maybe the one or two issues that will be right there at the end that will be fought over till almost the bitter end?
I would definitely say the higher education situation will be one of those. I am hopeful that the infrastructure piece for the oil counties will not be. I'm hoping that will be settled in the next week. Because I think it has to be. I think that has to be settled before we can move forward with some of the other pieces, because that has to be a number one priority.
So in other words, strap in. It's
Yes.
going to be a bumpy ride.
It is, and I think we'll be working this weekend. We won't have session, but we will have conference committees. And of course, with 105 of them, and many people are on lots, you can only be in one place at one time. There are some of us who think we can be in more than one place, but in actuality, that is not true. So.
Right. Thank you for taking the time today to talk to us.
I always enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me.
Our guest on Legislative Review this week, Representative Kathy Hawken from Fargo. She's a Republican and a member of House Appropriations. For Prairie Public and Legislative Review, I'm Dave Thompson.